What's up, YouTube? I recently rewatched all of the episodes from the original Scooby-Doo Where Are You? And thought that I'd do a top 10 of my favorite episodes out of the 25 that there are. Scooby-Doo is a show that I loved to watch when I was younger, so I think that it's kind of interesting how my opinion changed on certain episodes that I remember watching as a kid. And I also want to mention that this ranked video will not include any episodes from the Revival Where Are You series, even though it is sometimes called the third season. Before I get to the 10 best, though, I have a few honorable mentions that didn't quite make the list. So my honorable mention number 1 is Nowhere to Hide. I thought this had a really memorable beginning to the episode, where Mr. Hyde hit in the mystery machine, but it didn't really make sense why or how the gang just happened to drive to where his house was before they found him in the car. The monster design was cool, but the episode didn't really contain anything else special for me. Honorable mention 2 is Mind Your Own Business. It's a classic early episode of Scooby-Doo, but unfortunately it had an unintimidating monster. But that's contrasted with an interesting mining town setting. I found that it was one of the funnier Where Are You episodes, but other than that, it didn't really hook me in further with its mystery. Honorable mention 3 is Bedlam in the Big Top. I think that the Ghost Clown monster is one of the best of the series, but I feel like the episode didn't really take great advantage of the circus setting. The hypnotism trick is a great way to separate this episode from the rest, but it makes it feel like there's very little actual conflict that the gang has with the Ghost Clown, because it's just hypnotizing people and not actually antagonizing the gang itself. The honorable mention 4 is A Clue for Scooby-Doo. This one it's usually pretty high, I think, on people's lists, but for me, I only found that it was an honorable mention because it does have a great looking, unique monster. It puts the gang into an interesting underwater setting, and it also has one of the better Where Are You mysteries, and because it has lots of great clues with it, true to its name. But I was a bit disappointed because I thought the monster was underutilized, and it feels like it barely appears in the episode. My honorable mention 5 is What a Night for a Night. The very first Scooby-Doo episode this was. It feels a bit awkward at times with its pacing and lacks a lot of the intrigue of later mysteries, but once it gets going, I think it's a very solid entry. I like how when they're alone in the museum, the night is frequently cut to while it sits silently in the corner, and it builds up some good tension for when it will come alive. I also think it's pretty funny that in a series that I know for always having statues and paintings that seem to watch the gang, the first instance of that ever used in this episode was actually because it was someone tied up inside the statue, and not because it was a villain watching them.
Professor White!
Okay, so that does it for my honorable mentions. Now I'm going to get into the real best of the best, the top 10. My number 10 is Scooby's Night with a Frozen Fright. I think that the caveman monster doesn't really stand out when it's really compared to Where I use iconic monsters. And the setting I also thought was underwhelming. For an aquatic zoo type place, you'd think that there'd be more interesting chases I'll talk about that later. But you'd think that there'd be more interesting interactions that the gang has with animals and stuff. But what really brings the episode up for me is the chases. I'm a sucker for great Scooby-Doo chase scenes, and this one has a few really good ones. In particular, the musical chase scene might be my favorite in the entire series, because instead of a monster just chasing the gang everywhere, there were more elements to the chases. Like when Shaggy and Scooby hide in the aquarium, or when the gang hops across seals and whales. And I really felt it when the giant anchor fell on the caveman's foot. There was also a nice balance in between chasing Shaggy and Scooby and then also chasing the rest of the gang in the musical section, the musical chase. And I liked the use, how they used the shadow figures of the gang at certain points in the chase. But because the monster was uninteresting and the setting wasn't great, and I didn't think the mystery was that memorable, it doesn't really allow it to climb any higher than number 10. My number 9 is Jeepers, It's the Creeper. And this is another one that is considered one of the best ones. I still like it, but what I will say is that this episode contains an absolute classic monster. It has a very funny way of running. I think that the Creeper himself is the one element of this episode that pushes it up to the number 9 spot. The mystery itself uses the same idea as the Mystery Mask Mix-Up, which was the episode before, where the gang has an object that the monster wants, and the monster basically is chasing them to get it, not to really scare them away from a specific place, where that's sort of how the majority of the mysteries go, but this is a bit different. But I thought that this object was more interesting than the mask because it isn't clear to the gang why the Creeper wants it yet. But what I don't buy is that I don't buy the beat up guard decided to give them a riddle instead of just saying what the paper was for, and that Carlswell wouldn't just ask the gang for the paper if he knew where they were, because if he's the Creeper, he knew where they were to be able to chase them and try to grab the paper. And he could have just asked for it back, and they didn't suspect him, so they probably would have just given it to him. I thought the chase wasn't anything special, but it is really well animated compared to the rest of the episode chases. And the farm location for the dance, it really actually isn't very interesting to me. But I will say that the hay bales are used well. The Creeper has a solid monster design. But another thing that pushes him up for a monster for me is because he seems to have more character than most of the monsters in the Where Are You series. Because I already mentioned the funny way he runs, but his hunched over, one eye bigger than the other appearance also adds character. You know, and of course, he says his own name. I also found the Creeper to seem like one of the more threatening villains in the Where Are You series, whether it be the off-camera assault of the bank guard or his attempts to hurt the gang. Overall, though, the monster does stand out to me, but the other elements, in particular the mystery, don't really allow it to climb any higher than number 9. My number 8 is Never Ape an Ape Man. This one's a bit of a personal preference for me, because I had a DVD with this episode on as a kid. Never Ape an Ape Man does have some fun gags in it, and I like how the movie set made for an interesting place to snoop around, even if it was really unrealistic to an actual set. The Ape Man himself, though, is basically just a gorilla, so even though the monster design is kind of bad, it does feel like he has a pretty funny personality to him. I thought the ending, where Shaggy was able to get a picture of the monster without the mask, it does stick out among the other episodes, but I did find it disappointing rewatching it, how obvious that it is Carl, even without seeing his face, because you can see the back of his bald head. So yeah, it's a bit of a nostalgic pick, but that shouldn't take away from how fun it is, because that's its real advantage, I would say.
Wow! Look at those trophies. A deer, a rhino, a lion, and a...
Hey, Brian?
Ape Man. Don't be silly. That's only a trophy. Come on, let's play a game, Scooby.
Rum trophy? ready.
Wait a minute. Wait a minute. Watch this shot.
Run, Roo, Ree.
8-ball in the corner pocket. Sorry, Scooby. Uh-oh.
Run, Roo, Ree.
Let's see. Scooby's over there. Then who is?
My number 7 ranked Scooby-Doo Where Are You episode is What the Heck's Going On. Not the What the Heck's Is Going On, because I always hear people say that as well when I watch videos of people saying it. But it's What's the Heck's Going On, because that's, the point of the name. It'd be a play on words. The ghost of Elias Kingston, it doesn't really feel as threatening to me as the Creeper. Or even the 8-Man. When, the 8-Man's angry and is chasing after Shaggy with the camera, he kind of is freaky. But it is the Elias Kingston ghost. It's what he can do that freaked me out as a kid.
And finally, into the old mansion. And there is where I saw the ghost of Elias Kingston. The Weatherby fortune belongs to me. Unless it is returned to this mansion before morning, the entire family shall suffer this terrible fate.
Having the supposed power to rapidly age a person is terrifying, even if that makes it more obvious that the man behind the mask was the guy getting aged. And I liked how the gang didn't just stay in one location, like with most of them, and sort of went somewhere else to try and find some clues. Although, that section could have been handled a bit better. Many parts of this episode are also prominent in the original Scooby-Doo Where Are You intro, like the castle that the bats fly out of at the beginning of the intro. I think that what makes this episode where it is how well the monster's aging power is set up throughout the episode to make him genuinely scary. Elias Kingston himself is a solid Where Are You monster, but nothing else in this episode stands out to me, so that's why it's not any higher. Now I'm going to get to the top 6, and for me, they're pretty clearly my favorites and are a big jump above the rest, a tier above the rest, you could say. My number 6 is Haunted House Hang-Up, and I was a big fan of this when I was a kid. It's easily my favorite episode of Where Are You Season 2. I love the beginning of the episode where it introduces the Headless Spectre, because you get the close-up shot of his hand holding the candle, and I think it's super iconic, that shot in particular. And in my opinion, it's probably the best single shot in all of the Where Are You series. And I think that the Headless Spectre is also probably one of, if not my favorite, Where Are You monster. And then also the chase song, specifically like the song, not the chase, from this episode, it's also my favorite from all the chase songs that they added to Season 2. But I'm sure you're probably wondering why this fantastic episode is only at number 6. And that's because the haunted house trope is one that's very overused in Scooby-Doo. And I think that although this is one of the best, it doesn't feel that fresh and original. I think it also lacks the comedic moments that some of the other episodes above it are great with. And my final complaint, and probably the biggest complaint, is that it feels like it ends too early. Because the episode needed to have time for the solving of where the treasure is hidden subplot. But I could have used one more chase scene because it feels like I remember it being longer as a kid. Because when I rewatched it, I felt like they caught the monster a little easily. But regardless, I would still highly recommend this episode, as it was my favorite Where Are You episode as a kid. My number 5 ranked Scooby-Doo Where Are You episode is Hassle in the Castle. So I think that Scooby-Doo really hit it over the park with only the 3rd episode. This one has what Haunted House Hang-Up was missing, and that was comedy. And there was a lot of comedy. I find this to be the funniest episode of Where Are You? Because the Phantom doesn't have a very original design, but his ability to walk through walls and the funny gags that they have make up for that. And what I also find funny is that he has the same laugh as the well-known spooky space coop. But I just wanted to point out that the Phantom of the Haunted Isle did it first. Although maybe Spooky Space Coop did it better. The castle also has a lot of fun tricks that the gang discovers. And the scene where Scooby-Doo has to lure out the Phantom, it's the greatest. I think that this might be a perfect episode of Scooby-Doo, but I usually just, I prefer the ones above. My number 4 is A Night of Fright is No Delight. So this is definitely the scariest episode of Scooby-Doo, Where Are You? The setup is really compelling, because Scooby's been named to the will of an eccentric millionaire, whose life Scooby saved years ago. In order to claim the money left to him, Scooby-Doo has to stay a night in the man's haunted mansion, along with the man's relatives who are also named in his will. And if anyone leaves, their share is given to the others. So, that's a really interesting setup, because it makes a lot of great possible suspects for the monster, because it could be the other family members trying to scare Scooby away, as well as the reasoning for them wanting to scare the others away. It's clear, right? And it's not because there's some random uranium mine underneath the land that they wanted to get to, which is an actual plot of an episode. Not in this season, or not in this series, but in another one. And I haven't even mentioned the monsters yet. It's because the Phantom Shadows, otherwise known as the Green Ghosts, have a great original design, and they easily have the most terrifying monster sound in any Scooby-Doo series. I'm talking about any one. The beginning is great when Scooby was introduced to the Phantom Shadows, when he fell back in the bathtub. But I do feel like it loses a bit of steam in the midpoint of the mystery. It also lacks good comedy, but that gets more of a pass from me because it is trying to be scarier. But overall, I think it's a very solid, spooky episode. So my number 3 Scooby-Doo episode is actually That's Snow Ghost. And I don't know, when I see rankings, this one either isn't on people's lists or it isn't very high. So I think it's the most underrated of all the Scooby-Doo episodes. Because all Scooby-Doo Where Are You episodes I have to specify. Because I've noticed that I'm a bit of a sucker for the winter-themed Scooby-Doo episodes. But I just feel like this one makes use of the environment really well. Because the mystery is intriguing, the monster is great, and the episode manages to feel like it's longer than 20 minutes without feeling like there's too much packed in. And I guess my only criticism for the episode would be the lack of interaction with the suspects. But then again, most episodes don't include much interaction with them anyways. And number 2, Scooby-Doo, Where Are You?, is the backstage rage. This episode has a very interesting beginning, where Shaggy and Scooby find a violin case filled with money. While I don't think it's the best executed opening to an episode, it is really unique and draws you into the story. So the gang ends up going to the puppet shop that's advertised on a label they find on the violin and try to get to the bottom of the mystery. Theater is utilized well as a location for a mystery, and for me, the Puppet Master stands out as the most threatening bad guy in the Where Are You series. Even though he doesn't look or sound as scary as the Phantom Shadows, his constant attempts to harm the gang by dropping things onto them from above, it feels like he's really trying to harm them. More so than even in a haunted house situation, it feels like the puppet stage is the domain of the Puppet Master. And the gang is really in a precarious situation. And then my only complaint for the episode would be that the pacing feels a little off between Shaggy and Scooby finding the violin case to them actually exploring the theater. And the lack of suspects makes guessing the Puppet Master's identity pretty easy. And then, drum roll please, my number 1 Scooby-Doo, Where Are You? Episode, my favorite, is actually Foul Play in Funland. So I was actually pretty surprised that this ended up being my number 1. Because I did watch it as a kid, but I never loved it as much as the Haunted House Hangout or A Night or Fright Is No Delight. But watching it again, though, I love Charlie the Robot as the villain of the episode. Because where the puppeteer felt more like a human acting inhumanely, Charlie feels like a robot masquerading as a person, which he is. I loved how Charlie felt unstoppable because the gang just could not catch him. They set like 3 traps or something. The gangs, they're usually very reactive to the monsters that come after them. But in this situation, they were proactively trying to catch Charlie because Charlie wasn't actively trying to scare them away. I loved how the different Funland attractions were utilized, but it's probably pretty hard to make an amusement park location boring. And the lack of suspects in this case doesn't really bother me because Charlie doesn't feel like a person in a mask. I feel similarly about this episode as I do the Backstage Rage because they both do unique things with the typical Scooby-Doo formula. But this is better because it feels better paced. Overall, I think it's a great episode that I believe is the best, very best, that Scooby-Doo, Where Are You? Has to offer. Okay, so that is my top 10 list for Scooby-Doo, Where Are You? Episodes. You can feel free to post your rankings in the comments, but I do want to make this a series, so stay tuned for the next Scooby-Doo series, top 10. Which is going to be the next Scooby-Doo series after Where Are You? And that is the new Scooby-Doo movies. And I'll make the video for that after I finish rewatching the episodes. Peace.